Today's guest, Ian Whiteford.
The way we structured ourselves would align with the business. And so we would ask ourselves as a business, what should be central and consistent across all areas of the company? So, for example, the brand, we want the brand to be consistent. We want our marketing to be consistent. Our voice, our tone to be consistent across all areas, regions, products, as much as, we feel is reasonable. And so from a people and talent perspective, it's like, well, what do we need to be consistent from our perspective? So we don't want people on multiple different systems unable to interact with each other. So we need a central, IT team that supports that. Every time you walk into an Improbable office, either in China or London, I want it to feel the same. I want it to have the same look and vibe and feel familiar to people, because it's all about showing the culture we've got.
Ian started his career at Goldman Sachs in the UK and then moved to Improbable, which was a metaverse company, or is a metaverse company, actually a multiverse company, before Mark Zuckerberg even had the vision for it and Meta become Meta. So quite pioneering in that space. And he built out all the people, function, processes, infrastructure, when scaling from around 50 to more than 1,200 people across several locations like China, the US, and Europe. And then started his own company as a consultant now. We worked together already at Tier, when we also had some massive scaling projects going on there to consolidate payroll into one country, or not one country, but from several countries into one system. And he and I talked a lot about decentralization versus centralization, and also the difference between a DAO and VCs and a VC as a vehicle. So that's quite a broad episode, and then going also into what are the different approaches and mistakes you can make versus building central versus decentral. And this is something what you could really go way more deeper, and we probably do somewhere in the future. But now enjoy the episode with Ian.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Hey Ian, how are you today?
Very well, thank you, Thomas. How are you?
I'm also fine, and I love your new background. So what did you build there? So for all the listeners who also have video on YouTube and Spotify, you should check out where Ian is sitting. It's really a cool box.
Yeah, it gets variously described as some sort of TARDIS, some sort of Swedish sauna. But this is the pod that I've got in my garden. Was lucky enough to be able to build a pod. Didn't build it myself, I have to say, but built it sort of in the edge of the garden. So I've got the separation of work and home, which is fantastic. And just having that separate space makes all the difference. It's called Hully Pods, if anybody's interested. Highly recommend it. It's a great setup.
So you did it mainly to separate really work and private life also locally from the home office?
Exactly.
Setup? Smart.
I was finding it difficult when you're working from your house, trying to switch off, the kids are running in and interrupting you. So I felt I had as a priority when I've been working fully remote in the last 2 years to make sure I've got a separate space. And I have to say, for me, it makes a big difference. It really allows me to switch off as I sort of walk back to the house, and then I can be a more engaged parent.
Does it get warm in the summer in there, or really hot?
TBC, this is going to be my first summer, but let's just say it's already 20 degrees in here and it's not very warm outside. So I may be installing aircon if it gets really bad.
Yeah. So keep me updated. It looks really cool. So Ian, maybe for the listeners, can you give us a bit more context around your background?
Yeah, of course. Why don't I just start from the start, and feel free to jump in as always, Thomas. So for those that don't know me, I'm Ian. I've been in the people, talent, and operations space for over 10 years now. I started my career at Goldman Sachs, so very much in the corporate world. I interned with them and then started as a graduate. Had a fantastic 4 years, I think, with Goldman Sachs. It's definitely not for everybody. It's an extremely aggressive culture is maybe one word, but I absolutely loved it. It was a great place to start out my career, and I was lucky enough to have a variety of roles there. Everything from a sort of business partner to an operations to a people analytics, and then eventually an employee relations role. So really, an ideal place to start your career. Very challenging, but also really, really rewarding. But I then decided that it's very difficult to feel like you're having an impact in a place like Goldman Sachs. So I decided to move to a smaller company. I knew I wanted to get into the technology space, as that really seemed to be where the most exciting companies and the most exciting roles were. I was lucky enough that a company called Improbable decided to take a punt on me at the time because I really didn't have much relevant experience. For those that don't know Improbable, they are, I would call a metaverse company. We've been using that word for about 10 years, so well before it was popular. And really, Improbable did a number of things. We built our own games. We built a platform for games developers. And we also used that technology for the military and for simulations as well. And so I joined Improbable when they had 50 people. They were just based out of London. I initially joined as their head of HR, and then eventually was asked to take on some of the operations. So, facilities, IT, payroll. And then eventually, before I left, I was asked to take on the recruitment as well. And we really went on that crazy scaling journey. I made every mistake in the book. I was extremely uncomfortable the entire 5 years I was there. And when I left, we'd gone from 50 people.
So at what time did you start there?
So this was about 6 or 7 years ago now. So I think maybe 2016, something like that.
So when the market was really hot.
And yeah, exactly. When the market was very hot. And I left about 2 years ago. And by that stage, we'd scaled up to about 1,200 people. We'd expanded into the US, China, Europe. We'd acquired 3 companies. So really, really was that sort of once in a lifetime role. Was constantly struggling to keep my head above water. Most of the time it was underwater. And as I say, made a lot of mistakes in that time, but had a fantastic experience and learned an enormous amount as well. And then fast forward to where I am today. So after leaving Improbable, I decided to set up my own consultancy. I wanted to take some of the learnings that I'd had at Improbable and see how I could apply that and help a number of companies. And I was lucky that pretty much straight away I got connected to a DAO, which is, for those that aren't familiar, it's a decentralized autonomous organization. It's called the BitDAO, and it's a multi sort of $1 billion fund which invests in and spins up companies in the Web3 space. And what's unique about that, the fact that it's a DAO, means everybody who is a token holder gets to vote on where we invest, what companies we spin up. So very different from your traditional VC. And that has required a total rewrite of everything I learned at Improbable from a people and talent perspective. I've had to redo and think differently. And so that's been a great challenge. And I've been lucky to work with a couple of other companies as well, including Tier, where Thomas and I have been connected.
Yeah, I think we got connected even through a traditional VC, right? So we were connected through Nerf Zone back then, I remember. I think it was Elena.
I think that's right. Yeah, that's exactly.
And what's exactly the difference between a VC and a DAO?
Yeah, so if you think about your traditional VC, you've probably got a small team of partners, often less than 10, who will sort of be the main group responsible for the investments you make. So they will go out and source deals, and the group will all vote on, where we invest. And the actual investors who have put money into the fund, they don't have a say on where that money goes and what the investments are. They're very much passive investors. Whereas a DAO, the unique thing about a DAO is that everybody who owns a token, so you can go and buy however many tokens you would like, then for each token you have one vote. And so every investment or every company that we're going to spin up, there has to be a proposal. It must be discussed in our forums and, working through the pros and cons. And then everybody who's a token holder votes yes or no. So it's very much democratizing the whole concept of investment. And there's kind of many nuances to it, but that's a kind of high level summary of the differences.
And how many different investors does a DAO then have? And what are the ticket sizes? And what's the distribution of the big fishes versus the regular average investor? And what's the deal size maybe, or the investment ticket size?
Yeah, good question. So obviously every DAO is different, and you get different types of DAOs that aren't run as just investments and VCs. So for example, you might spin up a new fintech product in the Web3 space, some sort of exchange, and that can be run and operated by a DAO. So I would call it an experiment still at this stage, but it's really sort of, can we democratize companies? Can we really, how does it work when you really distribute decision making across a company? In many ways, that's the experiment of a DAO. But in our particular case, we're an investment DAO. We had, when the markets were at their all-time high, I think we had $3.5 billion and in our fund, and I think now we probably have about $2 billion. So we're talking about significant money.
Yes.
And the
so just a comparison. Just in comparison, Ian, I think I was just now at a investor summit at HV Capital, and HV Capital, they are quite established already, let's say in Europe, and they launched their 9th fund, and it's 750 million, I guess, for the fund number 9.
Exactly.
And you are talking there about 3 billion.
Exactly. So our strategy, because of that, is clearly it's not going to be, we could make $100 million investments, but it's going to be very difficult to move the needle. And so our strategy has been more of a fund of funds type approach. So for example, we have Game 7, which the treasury voted, and all of the token holders voted to assign 500 million of our treasury to Game 7, which is a fund effectively focused on, Web3 gaming, metaverse, how can we build tooling, make strategic investments. So it's been fascinating space, very, very different in every way, from both, what the business is doing, but also from a people and talent operations perspective. It's been a journey. And again, I'm at the stage of feeling, gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm learning every day. I'm uncomfortable every day, which is a nice place to be in.
And how did you get into this DAO space, and what is your exact role?
So I've been interested in the Web3 space for a while. Probably like a lot of people, I thought it was a get rich quick scheme, and I got scammed on different NFTs and invested in tokens which are now worth nothing, much to my wife's disgrace. However, that sort of grew into a real appreciation for what is possible in the Web3 space. And ultimately, it comes down to ownership. The products allow, and the blockchain allows us to have much more ownership over our own money, is like the classic example, or our data, or a number of different things, our identity. So, really, when you think of it that way, you start to see the opportunities. I became really interested in the space, and I was looking at where are a lot of the top talent going. So your grads from MIT right now, obviously it used to be your Googles and Facebooks is where they want to go. That really isn't the case anymore. A lot of them are looking to, spin up their own companies in the crypto space and the AI space, and it's really changing how sort of what the job market looks like. And I just sort of was getting more and more interested in the space, and then was lucky to be connected to a couple of people who were really the founders. So they work for a cryptocurrency exchange, which is, very much a central exchange run like a Web2 company. That they saw the future as being in the Web3 space, more in the DAO model of operating. And so they asked me to come on board, as number 3 and help them figure out how we were going to set this up from a people, talent, and operations perspective. So how were we going to go out there and hire the people we needed with the Web3 experience? How were we going to pay people? This concept of what's an employee, is very different in the crypto space. It's much more fluid. There's lots of different people contributing to a DAO. And so yeah, they asked me to come and help sort of figure some of this out. And it's been a sort of huge journey. Again, lots of mistakes made, lots of lessons learned over the last year or so since I've been working with them.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. How do you define, in your words, Web 2 versus Web 3? And maybe then, what do you think is different in the whole infrastructure systems from a people perspective?
Yeah, I'm sure I'll butcher this. I'm sure there's a lot better people to talk on these subjects than I am. However, from my perspective, it's like the key word I'd go back to is ownership. So if you think about the products that we use in Web 2, your Facebooks, your Amazons, your, name any other big tech company, it's very much a case of they own our data. We are the product. They own our data. They make all of their money that way. The banks are another good example of that. If I want to send you £10, I have to go into my bank, which then speaks to some central bank, which then speaks to your bank, and there's many different parties involved. We can see the danger of what happens recently when, Silicon Valley Bank goes under and people were potentially losing their deposits. So we don't have true ownership of that. The banks are owning that. So that's kind of the Web 2 picture. And then, what's the vision of Web 3? And I don't want to pretend that everything's rosy and been worked out and perfect in the Web 3 world, but ultimately what it comes down to for me is ownership. So I can store my money on the blockchain. We don't need any central party to confirm who I am or to, confirm that the money's there. Anybody can go on and see it. I can send you the money, the £10 directly to you without any middle parties. And we lose all the, inefficiencies of Web 2 because of that. And also from a career perspective, ownership is also the key word. People are drawn to Web 3, I believe, again, because of it comes down to this ownership point. They want ownership over their data or their money or, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that applies to a lot of Web 3 careers as well, which is people want more ownership over their career. They want the ability to work for a number of different groups, sort of contribute to a number of different projects. They want to move away from this very sort of top-down approach to management. And so these are the themes we've been grappling with in the last year.
And what are then some learnings you make here or made?
So there's a number of learnings. It's almost like, where do I start? So I think you have to take a real step back. And again, I'm going to keep saying it, but it's like the ownership piece, the autonomy piece is key. So then what you have to do is look at everything that, every aspect of the employee journey. And you have to ask yourself, well, how can we give people more ownership and autonomy over that aspect? So there's like the obvious ones, which is where they work right now. Obviously this is a theme in Web 2 as well right now, but people want a say. There's no perfect, fully remote, hybrid. Everybody is different. Everybody wants a different way of working. And so how can we give people the autonomy to make those decisions and try and set them up for success, allow them to set themselves up for success? So it's not about us saying this is our company policy. It's about us saying to them, how will you be successful, and let us help you. So if you want to go into an office for a couple of days, then let's think about how we can enable that. If you want to work fully remotely and you want to travel in your van around Europe, as long as you deliver and you're productive, then fantastic. And so, that's just an example. And then, definitely things like, how they're rewarded are completely different. So, there's much more focus on token compensation. So equity isn't really a big thing in Web3. It's all about sort of token compensation. And the nice thing about that is that tokens are liquid. So whereas with Improbable, your equity is not liquid. So, you end up sort of trying to sell the dream in many ways to your candidates, for example. The nice thing about tokens is, well, I can show you, right now what the value is. I can tell you what we want it to be, but ultimately you can make the decision on what it is today. You know that when you get that token, you can sell it there and then. And so there's definitely advantages there, but there's just kind of, it's probably not interesting for me to go into the detail, but things around the compliance of tokens, we'll hear a lot about the US regulations right now. So, how do you make sure you stay ahead of that and always stay on the right side of things? How do you make sure you're always above board? How do you make sure you're fair? There's kind of many challenges to do that. And again, from a sort of just a payroll and employment perspective, it's very different as well. Than, we do want to hire people for all over the globe. There's a lot of niche skill sets, your Solidity engineers, which is the main programming language on the blockchain. It's extremely hard to find good Solidity engineers. There's just not that many out there. That means they come at a real premium. There's no such thing as sort of regional salaries. It's all a global salary because they can work for, what number of projects who want them. And so, there's been lots of learnings and challenges around that as well.
And maybe let's go a bit into the learnings and challenges of Improbable, because I think it's especially from the people infrastructure side where you, I think, have a very strong spike from your expertise. Maybe we go a bit through the journey on how did you set up Improbable for success, scaling from 50 to 2,000, 1,200 people or so, because expansion to China, US, across Europe, and so on, it has a lot of bottlenecks. So let's maybe go a bit into that topic.
Yeah, so Improbable is an amazing one. As I mentioned, we really went through that extreme growth. And, my role, just kind of set the scene, changed a lot. My role started when I joined, I was sort of their first kind of, HR hire. They didn't have a lot of in place. They had a good talent team at the time that was hiring away, but then, everything else was a little bit of an afterthought from there. And so that's why they asked me to come in and focus on building up the basics. And, it was a real sort of punt on their end because I hadn't done anything. There was nothing I could really take from Goldman Sachs and apply, at a small company like Improbable. And so I didn't know what a value was when I joined. It was the real basics were sort of missing. And so it was my job really to just, get out there, learn, figure out what other companies were doing, and then start to put those basics in place. Then, as we grew, we took on a huge investment from SoftBank, which was about 500 million at the time. When, our burn was very low, we probably only had a couple of hundred employees. So that was the sort of next phase of really accelerating. And then my role had to change from, just running a small team to suddenly growing out the team, and I'll touch on some of the lessons as part of this. Managing managers and all of the challenges that's come with that. And, there was people in the company who weren't able to scale with the company and having to make difficult decisions there and lots of challenges, which I'll come back to. And then I guess like the final phase was really as we sort of started to acquire, expand into some of these new territories. Again, my role became much more sort of focused on the business and trying to be a good strategic partner to the C team, which isn't always easy in our roles. But I mean, I there's a few lessons probably that spring to mind. I'm
And
happy
Ian,
to
maybe
kind of just
before we
jump
go
into
into that,
them. And
before we go into that, can
Yep.
you give us a short context on the business or the strategy hypothesis you had also with raising this 500 million? Because I think if you raise that much money, you go in with a big bet. What was the bet, or is the bet?
Yeah. So the multiverse was the bet. This was before, as I say, Facebook had, rebranded and it was becoming all of the talk. But what it kind of boils down to is like to give everybody the ability to live in multiple different worlds, and how can these sort of virtual worlds be as meaningful? I'm not going to say indistinguishable, but as meaningful as the real world. So the interactions we have in them. So if me and some friends get together who are all, distributed around the globe, we get together and watch a sporting event or a concert together, and we interact like we're in person and we feel the connection to each other. And that's always been the goal of Improbable. And credit to Herman, who's had that vision. Herman's the CEO and founder. He's had that vision for years. And the reason that we took on such a large investment, our burn was tiny at the time, probably 20, 30 million, just off the top of my head. We took on 500 million. And the reason for that is it's extremely hard to do. There are so many challenges to solve, as we've seen with the likes of Amazon when they try and go into this space, or Facebook, who are currently obviously have all their efforts focused on this. It is really, really hard to build, both the underlying technology that supports this. So how can you have the scale and have a number of people in one space? That's very important for experiences. How do you make meaningful experiences, whether it's a game or a concert or an event? And so, we knew it was going to be a long journey, and we knew that we needed the funding to, allow us to experiment and work through that. And Improbable's still on that journey. Honestly, I think we've come on so far. I think they're doing very well. They're also have gone into the Web3 space, as there's very much alignment between these two things. But they're still on that journey. And so hopefully they're going to continue on and turn out very successful.
And to come after this huge vision of multi-product, multi-markets, how does the people side and the org side look like to enable this growth with the whole complexity? How did you have to partner with the CC that this is being enabled?
Yeah. So, ultimately, our structure within the people and talent team needs to reflect the structure of the business. And so what I mean by that is that the way we structured ourselves would align with the business. And so we would ask ourselves as a business, what should be central and consistent across all areas of the company? So, for example, the brand, we want the brand to be consistent. We want our marketing to be consistent. Our voice, our tone to be consistent across all areas, regions, products, as much as, we feel is reasonable. And so from a people and talent perspective, it's like, well, what do we need to be consistent from our perspective? So we don't want people on multiple different systems unable to interact with each other. So we need a central, IT team that supports that. Every time you walk into an Improbable office, either in China or London, I want it to feel the same. I want it to have the same look and vibe and feel familiar to people, because it's all about showing the culture we've got. So again, we would keep something like that central. Where's just the economies of scale, interview coordination? There's no need to have 6 different interview coordinators spread all over the globe. So, let's make sure we're centralizing things like that. But then you've got the question of, what parts of the business do we really want to be decentralized? And so, like, our China team's a good example of that, which is the market in China, is extremely different to the market in the US or the UK, for example. So that team needs the autonomy to adapt, be agile, make mistakes. They really need to be market and customer facing. And so, therefore, if we try and dictate that they must use the same performance scheme that we were using, in the rest of Improbable, it just doesn't make sense. So we would make sure that they had more of a decentralized, people and talent team. That doesn't mean that we weren't all in the same team and we weren't all working towards the same goals, but it gave those members of the team the autonomy themselves to make sure that they could build things that were meaningful and needed for the business. So that's how we thought about it, and we constantly iterated back and forth matrices, fully decentralized, fully centralized. There was lots of different iterations, as you can imagine, with any scaling company. But we always tried to come back to what's best for the business, how should the business be set up, and then we should ultimately be reflecting that.
And Ian, this is something really important what you just mentioned. I think you need to be very flexible and you need to go back and forth and decentralize, centralize based on company phase, based on leaders and functions and regions sometimes. And some people say growing organizations is a bit like an art. You could see it like that, but I see it more as a science, because you always need to see what's the environment and then try to get some variables and do some a testing of hypotheses, and also always backwards plan on what's the outcome you want to achieve. And based on the findings through experimentation, you then make a decision that is fundamental and not, we do it that way because I think the style is right now. I think that's not the right way, and many companies do that. So you need to have certain frameworks and fundamentals in how systematic and scientific you approach organizational design, especially through growth. But most companies just don't take the time to think, zoom out, and gather data and try to interpret it and talk with different stakeholders about what are the alternatives, what is the impact. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, you just run into a problem and you realize it after you have the problem. And that's fucking expensive. Sorry for my language.
I love your passion, Thomas. And I couldn't echo what you've just said more. I think, like, reflecting back on my time at Improbable, I think early on I definitely made mistakes with a couple of the aspects here, which is, number one, I felt like there was the right way of doing things from an org structure perspective, whether that was, look at how Spotify are operating and their model, that must be the model that works. Let's think about how we can adapt for us. Or then, right, I'm reading lots about these self-managed organizations, and I think, we should take some of these principles and try and apply them to Improbable. And, as you've just articulated, that's totally the wrong way to approach things. It's all about what are we trying to do as a business? What are our goals? And then, what structures will support those goals? And, so if you take a manufacturing company that's all about sort of efficiency and standardization, it would be nuts to try and decentralize a lot of things like that downwards. You need those controls, etc. So there's no right or wrong structure. It's all about, making sure the structure you have is in aid of the goals and the strategy. And that's definitely something I missed early on in my time at Improbable. And then I think, like, the second piece to that is making sure that everything else is pointing in the right direction. We keep hearing about, what's the sort of high performing, we need to make our company high performing, seems to be like the buzzword right now. Well, for me, that kind of comes down to, is your structure, are your incentives, your systems, are these all pointing towards the same goals and that ultimately is the goals of the company. And so that's definitely something I missed. And I think you touched on one other point there, which is also something that I did wrong in my early days at Improbable, which was building in isolation. I was used to the Goldman Sachs model of we would put together a new bonus scheme and we would, announce that to the company, and nobody would ever say anything. Nobody would ever challenge it. I'm sure they were absolutely furious in the background and hated us. But, they was just accepted and, we rolled it out. And I remember when I first joined Improbable and I tried to roll out, I think it was maybe a performance scheme or something like that to the company. And, I couldn't believe it. I was getting questioned. I was getting asked, well, why have we, gone for this approach? And where's the data to back this up? And it was like it was a really difficult lesson, but an important one to learn early on, which is, you have to build your people products with the company. It sounds simple, but it's harder. and a lot of companies still miss this. Is, you have to really teach, your employees or your customer, and shout out to Jessica her new book, Built for People. Haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm sure it echoes this, of treating your people products like a product, and, like any other product in the company, and, using the principles of product management to roll out your people products, and using design thinking to involve your employees in the journey.
I totally
agree.
agree.
Very important.
In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Ian, we need to shortly wrap it up because I promised my audience and try to stick to it that we make it around 30 minutes or less. We are shortly over, but we have still important content. So one thing I want to touch base with you is the whole people operations field. It seems like boring admin stuff because everybody just needs to enter their data and then you get paid, and then it's the foundation or infrastructure for basic people analytics, but that's it. This is how people see it sometimes. Maybe in the beginning that's okay because it's really not complex if you're a small company. But now tell us, what's the complexity in people operations when scaling Improbable, and also when you have multi-country to standardize payroll or just streamline payroll? What are the problems you need to maybe anticipate that you don't get into huge, I would say, payment delays of salaries, for instance, or just calculating wrong salaries, or just making fundamental mistakes that are just not good for trust with the employees and so on and so forth. So maybe we deep dive shortly into that topic.
Yeah, sure. So again, lessons learned through many, many mistakes over my time, and particularly at Improbable in this space. So, I would phrase it differently, which is, it's not an particularly interesting topic when you think about payroll or systems, data. But, when done right, that is a real enabler to a business. Like, I really, really believe that. And I've seen that with some of the companies I've been working with. If you have the ability to easily and quickly, spin up new entities or employ people in different places, go where the talent is or go where your customers are, that's a huge, huge advantage. And it's very difficult to do. And that's on the employment side. And then from a data perspective, something I'm very passionate about, and I'm lucky to have worked with some great people in this space, which is there is so much untapped data. And I'm not just talking about what's in your HRIS, but what conversations that go on, communication, Slack channels, performance data, marketing data. There is so much we can learn and do differently as a result of that information. And what I think we did in the early days, and what I see a lot of companies doing, and this is very natural when you're scaling up quickly, is it's totally reactive. Your systems strategy, your payroll strategy, your entities, it's right. We now need to go here. What's our quick solution to do that? we're going to roll out an engagement survey. So let's just get another platform here. Right, we need this report. So let's download our spreadsheet from Bob and let's kind of analyze it. It's all reactive. And the key thing is, if you want to build well in this space and consistently and for the long term, you have to really step back and design it from the ground up. And so, when we were Improbable, if we had a new joiner start, when we were maybe a few hundred people, if a new joiner started, it would be six different systems would have to be updated. None of them spoke to each other. We had like an accountancy firm doing our payroll on spreadsheets. We'd spend loads of time. There was just no, the reporting was manual, and we would have to run the reports and then give it to managers. And so, really, as we were scaling, we took the step back and said, right, how do we build this for the long term? So, thinking about either with your systems, you can either have, your best in class systems. So you're the best engagement platform and the best, OKR platform, but make sure they link up and speak to each other and give a consistent experience to the employee. We all have system fatigue. The last thing you want is to be having to log on to loads of different platforms with different whatever passwords, etc. So in certain cases, we went for that type of approach, or in certain cases, let's maybe lose some functionality, but that allows us to have one platform that can serve them all. So, we went through a huge project where rather than using 12 different local payroll providers, we moved on to CloudPay, a global payroll provider. And, what that meant is that, payroll goes from, in every region, you're spending 3 or 4 days, a month, running payroll, to suddenly, you're doing it in one day across the globe. Yes, it takes a lot of setup to get there. And then it also allows us to be, suddenly we're going to be moving into this region. And, we know we've got the infrastructure there to scale quickly and efficiently. And then equally on the data side, again, it's not revolutionary, but let's get every piece of data we have into our warehouse. Let's leverage the warehouses that we already have from our engineering teams, etc. Let's get every single piece of data we've got in there as point one. There's the data cleanliness point then that comes as two, right? Shit in, shit out. So let's make sure that we have the processes right, that data is up to date, clean. There's Slack bots reminding people and error reports, whatever we need to do. And then let's build out dashboards for people in whatever platform you want. We chose Tableau. And let's get that data in the hands of managers. The last thing that we want to be in the people and talent team is sort of the owners of these things. It's like, let's enable our managers. Let's get the data in front of them. Let's sort of allow them to react, as and when they need to. And so now when I sit down with young companies in particular, I really try and stress let's be proactive in our building in this space. It will save us enormous pain down the line. It really, really will. Let's think about, what's scalable here? What's our solution going to be? Are we going to go best in class and link them all up? Are we going to sort of sacrifice some of the functionality and sort of roll out one platform to rule them all? Let's think now about our data. Let's push it out to where people need it when they need it. Because certainly, from my experience, it saves enormous, enormous pain.
I agree. It was a very, very strong summary and blueprint, I would say. So thank you so much. Any final words from your side?
No, I guess I just want to say, thanks for having me. Really great to be on here. If anybody's feel like I've only really just scratched the surface there, I made so many other mistakes at Improbable and beyond. If anybody's interested ever in hearing anything, then please do reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. And yeah, it was just nice to reflect back on some of the madness.
Yes, and we also had some madness together, I can say. So any other guest you would recommend I should interview?
Oh, I mean, there's many. Jessica, have you interviewed her yet? I mean,
no,
maybe
but
she could
virtual.
come
I think Virgil also told me Jessica, but then I think we never got the intro done. So if you know her and could make an intro and ask her if she would be up for a podcast, I would love to do so and interview her, definitely.
Great. I'll definitely do that, Thomas.
Yes, nice. Okay. Yeah, then Ian, thank you so much. We link the book in the show notes and also your LinkedIn so people can reach out. And I can definitely recommend reaching out to you because I think it was really a key contact when we found you as well. For Tier back then, it was a high complex and high pace project we needed to deliver, and you were a key enabler in many things. Thank you.
That's a good summary. Well, thanks, Thomas. You take care.